that.
You should. It's cool. What is it? It's not right. F-E-T-L-A-N-G.
All right, and we are live. Let's see. Hello, Free Code Camp World. I don't think there's many of you guys in the comments yet, but hello. We'll give you guys a few minutes to get here, and then we're gonna get started, get underway. Just to say, some of you guys may not know, but I'm actually presenting this workshop in front of a classroom of students, part of my club, the Wentworth Computer Science Society. So sometimes I'll be talking out that way, and that'll be to the students in the room with me, and sometimes I'll be facing the camera and talking to you guys. So give you a few more minutes to get in here, and yeah, we'll get underway. Who in Free Code Camp has ever used JavaScript before? There we go. I see a few people saying they have. Awesome. Cool. So to answer a question just got, this will only be covering some ES6. The goal of today's workshop is going to be an introduction to variables and data types in JavaScript, and then we're going to work into using some of the fun ES6 syntax to really show off some of the cool things you can do with JavaScript and the JavaScript language. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit about some next steps, some implementation. So cool. I see a lot of you guys are in here now, and we're going to get underway. So if everyone could navigate over to codepen.io, it's the site you see on my screen here. We used this last time in our React talk, and it's a really great website. I highly recommend using this for all like learning, and even just if you're building something, it's really fun. It updates live for you, and you can check out other people's fun projects as well. So to start off, we're going to create a new pen, and this time we're going to do nothing to the config. We're going to write strictly JavaScript, and then down in the bottom left corner you should see the console button. I want everyone to press the console button for me. This is going to be where a lot of the stuff that's going to happen is going to show up. So we'll make that nice and big. And I'm going to turn over to here, get my notes up, and we're going to get started. So I hope many of you at least have a somewhat of an idea about what what JavaScript and what coding in general is. We deal with data. We have data in, data out. We want to do stuff with that data, and the way we do that is by very most basic concept. We declare that data exists. So in JavaScript, the way we do that, it's contrary to Java or C, is in JavaScript we're going to use the var keyword. That stands for variable. Then we're going to give it a name. So we're going to say literally name equals, and then unlike most languages where you should be declaring a data type like a string or an integer or a double, we could just put whatever we want to put into this variable here. And in this instance, we're going to use a string. So you can either use a single character or you can use double quotes, and then just type your name. I'm going to type mine. Another aspect to JavaScript is semicolons. A lot of people are like, are semicolons necessary? In JavaScript, they are not. I use them because I write Java a lot as well, and it's just really easy for me to, when I'm reading my code, if I can see a semicolon, I know that's the end of a line. So you'll see me using that, but if you're uncomfortable or you don't feel like typing that extra character, you don't have to at all. So we're going to declare a few more variables here. I'm going to say age, and then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to do something fun. We're going to say favorite bands. And my favorite bands, I recently got a Real Friends sweater in the mail. It's a lot of, really excited to get that. Then we're going to add another one. It's called Movements. These bands are really small. And then one final one. And you guys can fill yours with whatever you want. You don't even have to put bands in there. You can put your favorite ice cream flavor, your favorite cookie type, your favorite pizza, anything at all. And if you notice, we have 3 different data types here. We have a string represented in the name. We have the age, which is an integer. And in Java, there is no difference between declaring integers and declaring doubles. So if we were to say fraction, we can go ahead and we can say 2.5, and that would be essentially the same thing as writing a double or a float in Java. And then we have a list. So what's kind of cool in JavaScript is that lists are a native data type. They're a collection just like they are in Java or Python or C. And in this collection, in this list, I'm using strings. But what's unique to JavaScript is that you can actually put any type of data you want inside a list with other data types. So I can actually go ahead and put in a number here, and that is valid. It's not very useful, but it's valid, and this will run just fine. But we're going to remove that because we're not going to do anything with it. Next, we're going to go over what an object is. So an object in JavaScript is similar to like a class in Java, but a lot basic. There are classes in JavaScript, but we're not going to go over those because you could spend a whole hour teaching just classes in JavaScript. But an object is declared just the same way as these previous data types were. So I'm going to say me because the data I have above describes who I am. And then we're going to use curly braces. So we're going to form this kind of code block. And then we're going to say name, or we're going to use string name. And this is a property. Then we're going to use a colon, and then the data, the variable name. Then we're going to do another one, age, put the age in. And then we're going to say favorite bands. Put the favorite bands in here. And then we're going to use one more, and we're going to do favorite pizza. And if you notice, I haven't declared a favorite pizza variable yet, but that's okay because I'm going to go ahead and put the string that describes my favorite pizza right here. And I'm just going to say buffalo chicken. You can agree or disagree with me on that one. Awesome. So this is the basics to describing variables in JavaScript. So, there's really not a whole lot to it. You have your list, you have an object, you have doubles, you have integers, you have strings. And if you are wondering how to access this data, all you do is declare it on a new line. We're going to use a statement called the console.log statement. And console.log is going to let us print something to the console, which is this big gray box to the right is. So in this instance, we're just going to print out the name, my name real quick. And if you notice, it pops up on the side immediately. CodePen live updates as you type. So sometimes the console will get filled, and I'm just going to clear it using the clear button. So you'll see me do that throughout the talk. And we can go ahead and we can change what's in here. Change it to age. 18 will appear on the screen. And then you can even plug in an array, and it'll print out the raw array string with what it's contained with. And then now you're probably wondering, great, we're storing all this data. In the object especially, we have this kind of, all the data is mashed into one little object. How can we access the data in that object? We have a couple different methods. We can go ahead and we say the object, and then we can put a square bracket, and then we can put the string of the property name inside that square bracket, like name. And you notice, here it is right here. Here's my name. And then I'm going to create a new line so you guys can keep that one there for reference. We're going to go ahead and we're going to write me dot favorite pizza. And if you notice, down here at the bottom of the screen, buffalo chicken was added to the console. So here are two different ways to access access data types on a JavaScript object. So how's it going over in the freeCodeCamp side? You guys have any questions yet? Let's see, we'll do a little bit of a scroll. Yeah, sorry, some people are asking if a list is an array, and yes it is. I'm a array, list, collection, those are all very synonymous words. And someone else asked let, and yes, we should be using let, and that's what I was going to get to next, is that there's these two magical words in JavaScript that are used for variable declaration called the const and the let. So we've been using the var keyword here, and what we can do with var is you can actually reassign that if you're using unstrict mode. So there's a way you can make JavaScript evaluate in something called strict mode, and in which case what I'm about to do is not allowed. But in all intents and purposes, what I am going to do is valid in JavaScript. You say var, redeclare the name, and I'm going to say my last name. And then all of a sudden, if I was to go ahead and console.log my name at the bottom, you'll notice at the very bottom of the screen here, the new variable declaration for name comes up. But let's declare a let variable. Let operates in much the same way as var, where you say let, and then the variable name. I'm just going to go for simple a, and you assign it a value 1. And this accesses the same way as a variable will. You can add it to objects. But what's special about let is that it's block scoped. And what that means is if you were to use this, if you're familiar with Java, where you're wanting to, you have a loop. You have a for loop, and we're going to have in Java you would use int I. Well, in JavaScript, you would want to use let I equals 0. I is less than, arbitrary number 5, I plus plus, and then we want to, do something in here. I'm not going to actually do anything, but, you can do something in that code block. That I variable that you've declared in that for loop is accessible inside here. You could call I from inside this for loop. But then, when you go outside of the for loop, that I variable is no longer declared. And that has to do with the scope of the variable I. It's kind of confusing. It's also kind of it's more for syntactical purposes, that difference between var and let. But just know that that's kind of where it comes from. But the third way of declaring data types using the const keyword is the most useful one. This is like declaring a final value in Java, where when you declare a variable as a constant, it cannot change. So let's go ahead and let's declare a new one, constant b, and we're just going to give it 2. Very simple. And we're going to print it out to the screen. At the bottom, you should see 2 comes up. It does. And now let's reassign 2. So say b equals 3. And then we're going to say console.log, and as long as this doesn't fail me now, it should not get reassigned. And if it does, I believe it has crashed, because if you notice, nothing has reappeared underneath this 2, and that is because this is invalid. If CodePen doesn't show errors inside its console, but what I'm telling you right now is that this is invalid. Redeclaring a constant is not going to work. In any other if you were to run this in a browser console, or if you were to run this through Node.js or some compiler like Babel, it will throw an error at you and say invalid, you can't redeclare a constant. And it's really, again, this is the value of having these different ways of declaring variables is more for program structure. So program structure in a sense where if we're writing a very complex program and there's a lot of developers working on it, and we declare a variable like the database URL, and we don't want that URL to change, we would declare it as a constant. That way, other developers that are using our code will know that that database URL is never going to change, and they can rely on that value never changing because it's declared as a constant. Now, if a variable was declared as a let or a var, then there would be some sort of obfuscation where it could get changed, where some aspect of the code could change that value, probably in some iterator function or of the sort, and then it would be unreliable to write more code based on that potentially changing data type. Cool. So that's pretty much all I have for the variable declaration, and now we're going to move into some of the fun ES6 stuff that we can use with these variables. Before we dive straight into that, though, we're going to go over one concept that's called functions or methods. In Java, you declare a method by writing the function keyword, then the variable, then the method name. You pass it its parameters inside the parentheses, and then you add some squiggly brackets, and then inside there you can do whatever you want with the parameters, but at the end you should return something. In our case, we're going to return a plus b. And if we go below here and we call sum, or we're going to use a console.log so we can actually see it, and we say sum of 1, 2, we should see in our console 3. So, magic, right? I couldn't believe it myself when I first wrote a function in JavaScript. It was that easy. So yeah, that's basic function syntax. It's very very simple. But let's make this a little bit more complicated. I'm going to show you guys a sneak peek into an array method called map. So we're first going to declare a constant. We're going to say scream it. It's going to be the name of our new array, and that array is going to be the favorite bands dot map. So in JavaScript and in the ES6 package, it sent a ton of new, really useful array methods that let you iterate over the contents of an array without having to use an encapsulating for loop. So what that means is you pass it this method, and then we can create a function, and we're going to say we're just going to call the function just x because it's simple, and then we don't need to call it anything. That's my mistake. Just function, and then parentheses, and then we're going to pass it the band parameter. Use the squiggly brackets, and then we will return the band dot to uppercase. And what this will do is this map function will loop over the entirety of the favorite bands array and return each value fully uppercased inside a new array assigned to the scream it variable. So we can go down here, and if you do console.log and you put in scream it, it should, on the side, you should see all of the bands in full uppercase letters. Sweet. So this is very simple, and we're using function notation, but I want you to kind of look back at this. We got a lot going on here for a pretty simple task. We have this really long function word that's 8 bits of data right there. 1 byte of data is going for just the keyword function inside our map method. And that function keyword is almost as long as our variable name itself. So can we reduce that? We can, with something called arrow functions. Arrow functions is something, again, new to ES6. The syntax is going to look really weird, but if you've come from a Java background and you've ever used a lambda expression before, it's going to look similar to that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to describe a new variable. We're going to call this one const whisper it. We're going to go again over the favorite bands array, and we're going to map. And this time, instead of writing the function keyword, we're just going to write parentheses, just like that. And we're going to put the band parameter right in there. And then we're going to use equal sign, greater than sign. Looks like an arrow, doesn't it? Hence why it's called an arrow function. And then you're going to use squiggly brackets, just like we did in the previous function. And we're going to return the band to lowercase. And now this method, when we print out the result to our to the console, we should see the bands all in lowercase. And if you notice, we've decreased the amount of characters we've used in our function. And that's not all that this lets us do. Arrow functions also have a really fun syntax you can play around with. We can actually rewrite this function that we just wrote even simpler. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to comment that out. If you're on a Windows, you can do Control / while highlighting text, and it will comment the whole block. On Mac, you're going to use Command /. So then let's redeclare the whisper it array, and we're going to say favorite bands again. We're going to do dot map, and this time we're not even going to write parentheses. We're just going to write band, just the word band, arrow function, and then we're going to write band again, and then the to lowercase method. Look at that, one line, and we got the same behavior that we did with 3 lines of code. What this is doing, what this arrow function syntax is doing, is with a single, that is pretty small, I'm sorry guys, let me make that a little bit bigger for you. With this single parameter data type here, what that's letting us do is we can exclude the parentheses. Dropping the parentheses means that this arrow function is going to receive one argument, one parameter. That parameter is banned. Then the return statement. This return statement is going to do one thing and one thing only. It's going to return whatever comes after that arrow function, that arrow key right here. So in this instance, we're just lowercasing the entire string. But in another example, when I use arrow functions and these array methods in React, in the React library, I'm writing these complex rendering algorithms that feed in bits of data from a database, and they need to render like 50 different nodes that have very similar structure, very similar component structure, but change just something as simple as the text. And with React, all I do is I write an arrow function just like this. I loop over my database, the data from my database, and I just pass it, whatever's changing, to my arrow function. And my arrow function is just going to return a piece of React component back to the application. And then all of a sudden, I have 50 nodes generated from one line of code. And that's really the magic that goes into using arrow functions and these array methods in ES6. Cool. So let's go ahead and go over to another aspect of ES6 called default parameters. And then once we finish that, I'm going to take a quick sip of water and we're going to do a little bit of questions just to make sure you guys are all caught up. So before I declared a function called sum. This time I'm going to call a function diff, and we're going to do x and y. Let's spruce it up. And we're going to return the difference of x and y. And then we're going to go down here, we're going to do console.log difference of 3. Notice anything wrong? Go for it.
You need a y value.
Exactly. I need a y value. I've only passed one parameter or argument to my diff function, but it's expecting 2. As a result, JavaScript doesn't throw any errors. All it's going to do is return NaN, which stands for not a number. And this is expected. This is what JavaScript does. It tries to assume that you meant to do this. But let's say we didn't. We never want to receive not a number from our function. In fact, I will always want to see a number. Even if that number is wrong, I still want to see a number there. So what we can do is we can go inside our function declaration and we can, next to the parameter, put an equal sign and then whatever the default value is. I'm going to see the default value is 0. And now if you notice on the right, the NaN was changed to 3 because 3 minus 0 is 3. And then if we go ahead and let's see what happens if we pass no arguments to the diff function. It goes back to returning not a number. And that not a number is because the x is not defined. Again, we're not passing anything in for the x value now. But we can go ahead and we can declare something as the default for the x. Let's use 0 again. And now if you notice, even when we call the diff function and there's nothing passed to it, we're still going to get a number. That will keep our application running. And this is really useful for when you have some sort of useful default data. I love to go back to React. In React, you have all these components, a lot of textual user interface components. You never want to return some nasty error to your users. So instead, if you could set a default, like for example, a string, a basic string, that's going to be a lot more better for your user experience than it would be just to, throw an error and have the whole application crash because you forgot to send a parameter. So cool. So I'm going to take just a quick minute. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time. No? All right, we'll check the freeCodeCamp chat real quick. So let's see. Okay, so someone asked, should one start by learning JavaScript syntax and then ES6, or right away learn ES6 syntax? So you should definitely learn JavaScript first, because even though ES6 is JavaScript, when you're writing code that's going to be used on every browser, it may not always run the ES6 syntax, not yet at least. So it's best that you learn the basics and all the very generic JavaScript syntax first, and then move on to sprucing it up with some ES6. Plus, a lot of the ES6 things that I'm going to show you today are quite simple, but there's just as much complicated things that come with ES6 that even I'm still trying to, wrap my head around and really fully utilize in my applications. All right, let's see. Another one. Is the rule for that syntax that you can only do a single statement, otherwise you need to use parentheses? Great question, Martin. Yes. In the above arrow function, the one where we lowercase the band, if we wanted to write multiple lines here, we would have to use either those squiggly lines and a return block, or we can wrap this in parentheses. And then those parentheses act as kind of like a mock code block, and that code block will return everything inside of the parentheses. So let me fix this up a little bit. So what this just did is now what we can go ahead and do is now we can actually write multiple lines, but we're going to return everything inside it. So this gets a little weird, and it's kind of again this is in there mainly for React when you're returning a JSX component, which is HTML. So you know how HTML can have multiple things within it, and that nested structure requires multiple lines. So in that instance, you would use these parentheses to return just that JSX component, but that multiple line JSX component. In our example, we're only using one line of code, so we're only returning one line of code. Great. So we're going to move on to another really fun operator called the spread operator. And this is going to replace array concatenation. So let's go ahead and let's define another array. I'm going to call this array more bands. I like music, so I'm going to go ahead and add a few more in here. So here's one, and here's another. And now I want to make one list that contains my more bands and my favorite bands. So let's go ahead and write let all bands equal favorite bands dot concat more bands. And if we print that out to the screen, we should see an array containing both the 3 bands that I listed at the beginning of this talk and the 2 bands I just added to it. Expected. And this uses a traditional JavaScript function called concatenate. And it works just like any, it's concatenation. You take everything from one thing and everything from another object and you smush it all together. But let's say we had a third array. So let's say even more bands, okay? And in this one, I'm going to write AC/DC. Oh, that's not AC/DC. And Green Day. We're going to go ahead and we're going to concatenate that one. Now, we can go ahead and we can chain it. So we can do concat even more bands. And that just kind of looks nasty. Or we could have, wrote all bands dot concat even more bands on the line below it and reassign, delete that, and then it should, yeah, so then we can concatenate, and then see how even when we write this line, we would have to reassign the all bands variable to this new concatenation. And look, we want to concatenate all 3 of these lists, but right now we're using the concat statement over and over again, and we're redeclaring variables, and it's getting messy. There's a lot of text. Let's simplify this. First of all, I'm going to delete everything here. Oh, please don't go back. I'm going to delete everything here, and I'm going to declare a new array, a blank array. Inside that array, I'm going to do 3 dots. So, and then after those 3 dots, we're going to write the name of our array that we want to concatenate, favorite bands. On the right, you should see the 3 bands pop up. Sweet. Then next, we do comma, 3 dots again, and then more bands. If you look to the right, the other array shows up. I bet you can imagine what we're going to do next. 3 dots, even more bands. And now, with some nice white space tidying, by the way, JavaScript is a non-white space dependent code language, so you can do whatever you want with the white space between things. JavaScript doesn't care, because it interprets based on keywords, not based on white space. So with a nice little syntax, right, like this, we can keep listing all of our arrays over and over and over again. And in a real world example, let's say we had a database with a bunch of different lists of things, I don't know, shopping carts, and we wanted to make a grand shopping cart. Instead of trying to concatenate every single small array into one big one and returning that to the user, we could build this nice structure here with the spread operator and spread out all the contents into another array. This is also useful for function declaration. Back up here we had parameters, right? We can actually, if we had a array of things, let's say again a shopping cart. We had an array of we had a shopping cart full of items, and we had a function that would, I don't know, make a really like a pretty print function. It would print out all the contents in your shopping cart, and we wanted to pass every item in that shopping cart to the function as its own parameter, not as one big list, but as its own parameter. We could actually go into the argument defining area of a function and use this same syntax where we spread out all the properties within an array into some other structure like a parameters list or an arguments list or another array. And another example, React handles state, props and state. That's, if you guys are interested in what I'm talking about, there is a video I did 2 weeks ago around this time about React JavaScript, and we did talk about props and state and maintaining that. And let's say we're updating our state, but we want to hold on to all the previous state. We could actually go ahead and let's say we had some object here, right? We had like const state equals something, and we're going to say like list, and that list is going to have the values 1, 2 in it. I'm gonna quickly change this to let because we're gonna reassign this, and then we want to update this state with something new. So we're gonna say state equals, and then we're gonna say the list, but then we want to concatenate to that list. So instead of writing like list.concat and then putting our thing in here, we could actually go ahead and we could just put another array right like this, the spread operator on the previous list, or we'd actually have to use state.list. And then, comma, our new values, our new variables, 3, 4. And then all of a sudden, if we console.log this state, you'll see we have an object with the list 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we did the same console.log statement and we put it here, you see we only have 1 and 2. So you'll notice this spread syntax is really useful for keeping your code clean and keeping it concise, and letting things maintain itself without the unnecessary need for methods and large chains of methods. Cool. So we can delete. We can leave that. And now we're going to go into. We have 2 more things to go over today. Let me check some questions. Let's see here. freeCodeCamp. What do you prefer, jQuery or React or Vue? I am a React developer. I've been learning it for about 3 years now, and I have started to contribute to the open source project as well. So I like to focus on React, even though I am familiar with jQuery. Let's see. All right, cool. So let's move on to the last 2 subjects in today's workshop: template literals and object property shorthand. So we're going to start with, honestly, my favorite feature of ES6, and it's called template literals. It's another way of removing the unnecessary need to concatenate strings. So let's start off by declaring the old way we used to concatenate strings. Const s equals, and we're going to build a sentence here. We're going to say my name is space plus the name variable, which we declared all the way back at the top of this function. And we're going to put a period in here because we're writing an essay. We got to make sure we have proper sentence structure. We're going to console.log, put s. On the right, you should see my name is Arrowood. My name is Ethan, but that's my last name. Cool. And that's not too bad. But what if we wanted to make a more complex sentence? So let's say s2. We're going to say my name is, or actually no, let's do my name is Ethan plus my last name, comma, and I am my age, years old. And we console.log that to the screen. You'll see we get the sentence that we want. You know, my name is Ethan Arrowood and I'm 18 years old. But that was a lot of typing, and that's really gross. You know, what if we want to change the part of the sentence? We got to make sure we don't mess up, you know, the spacing around the words, and that, you know, the name and the age variable doesn't get changed. So we're going to use template strings. So we're going to call a new variable constant t. And now there's a little symbol at the top left of your keyboard next to the 1. And it's a little tick mark. It's there's also, if you hold shift, it would be the grave key. And it's going to look like this. And this is template strings. Inside here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to write the same sentence that we did before. We're going to say, my name is, and then instead of doing plus the variable name, we're going to write $, squiggly bracket. It'll automatically add another one to the end of it. And then inside that, just put the name variable. Put your semicolon, and then console.log the t sentence. And if you notice, we get the same effect as the sentence structure we wrote above. And this time, the word is embedded directly in here. And if you wanted to add more text to the sentence, you can, without any more concatenation. Just comma, and my fake age is age. But I actually am 18. So let's change that. Let's have some fun with this. I want to square my age. In JavaScript, when you square numbers, you use the multiplication sign, the shift 8, and you do that twice, and you give it a number. And if you notice to the right, it doubles the age variable right in line. And what this does, what this template letter, what these little code blocks are doing, is it's letting you embed, basically embed JavaScript inside your strings. So that, again, when you're building these beautiful user interfaces and you want to do something like camel case a piece of text, or you want to scream something and uppercase the whole thing, but it's not stored as such, you can embed that process right into the rendering string. And it will do it right there client side, reducing the load on a potential server or anything, you know, prior to rendering text to the screen. And it doesn't, you know, this isn't what this is. There's so much more you can do with this. You can, you know, we can do another sentence, and we can say, my favorite band is, you know, get the same template strings in here, and we can say we have the all bands array. And we can access the first index of that array using square notation 0, and then console.log the second template string to the screen. And all of a sudden, my favorite band is Real Friends. Very true statement. And we wrote that all in one line. We didn't have to pull off that variable in any sort of like new declaration. We just embed it directly in the string without the need of plus signs or any sort of string concatenation methods. Cool. So are there any questions on template strings? No? All right, we'll give a quick check to the chat, and we'll see. All right, someone's asking, what are the prerequisites for the React framework? Like how much of JavaScript, etc., one should need to learn before starting React framework? I can elaborate a little bit more on this at the end, but the short answer is get down, you know, the basics, and then start, you know, be comfortable writing some just client-side, work through the basic freeCodeCamp front-end projects. And once you finish those front-end projects and just native JavaScript, you are more than ready to dive right into React. And what's phenomenal is that the React community has tons of documentation and a lot of tutorials, so it's going to be really easy for you to get started in the React framework when you're ready. And does it have to be single quotes? Yes, Martin. This tick mark is not the same as a normal quotation mark, which is what is kind of the same, which is on the same key as the double quotation mark. This is the key all the way up next to the 1 button. So it's a tick. Notice how they're slightly different, and that's what is template strings. They use those special tick marks. You cannot embed the $sign squiggly bracket inside any other string. Cool. All right, we got one more topic to go here, and then we are going to wrap up. So let's talk about object property shorthand. So like I said at the beginning of this workshop, a lot of the things that ES6 gives us is syntax that lets us simplify how we write code. It makes our lives as developers easier. So let's declare some variables. Let's say const lecture, and we're going to say algorithms. And then we're going to say const capacity equals 20 students. We're going to say const professor. And because I don't want to give out anyone's names, I'm going to say Professor Arrowood, someday. And then we're going to say and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to declare a classroom. And this classroom object, traditionally, what we wrote at the very beginning, we would have to use a string, lecture, and then we'd have to put the lecture variable here, and then we'd go to the next line and write capacity, and so on and so forth. And that would get tedious. What we can do instead is we can actually go ahead and delete everything aside from the word lecture. Don't even wrap it in strings, just the word lecture. Same for capacity, and same for professor. And if we come down here and we print the classroom object, you'll notice that all of our variables, all of our data that we predefined is input directly into our object. And it can be used the same way as any other object is. You can reference it, you can pull it out, you can save things to it. And this is just a nice, really useful way to declare objects in a very simple format. However, let's say you wanted to call, let's say you wanted to be a little bit more strict with your object definition. You wanted to call the professor, property the full string. So, you want to add the rest of the word professor. Now, this is not going to render anything on the console here because this is actually breaking. This is code. This is going undefined. There is no variable type called professor. So in this instance, we would still need to use the, assignment operator, colon, and then the variable professor, or prof, P-R-O-F, and then it happens again. So this is just, and then what this lets you do is that as your object grows and you add more properties, let's say building, and we say, Wentworth, we can go ahead and we can just, add that property straight to our object. And it just appears. And it imports whatever string or any data you pass to it. And this is not discriminant to just strings and integers. You can actually go ahead and, in the instance there were multiple buildings, you could, pass in an array of buildings here, and you would get a list, and it would work the same way. So this is just an example. And then what this leads to, and you're like, why is this really that useful? Well, it has to do with it all goes back to React, for me at least, where you have these long, complex rendering algorithms with a lot of JSX. And for those that don't know, JSX is HTML written in JavaScript, and you want to embed things. You want to pass properties and tons of data to these HTML blocks, but you don't want to write out these super long pieces of code that are impossible to read. So instead, you will pass it just a basic object with a property that has the same name as the value or data that it's representing. And that just keeps cleaner code for, easier readability and easier usability down the road. As a special treat, I do have one last thing. I just forgot to put it in the description of the live stream and the description for the email blast. And this is destructuring. I used this a lot in the React workshop 2 weeks ago. And this lets us pull things off of objects. So let's quickly create a new object. We'll keep this one simple, just A. We're going to say ABC, B, CDF, or whatever, CDF. And then we're going to go down here, and we're going to say, I want to read the values from this object. But I don't want to have to declare, I don't want to have to be like const A equals x dot A, and then, const B equals x dot B. This is valid. This is the way you could do it. But there's a different way. If your variable name is the same as the property name in the object, you can actually simplify this to const squiggly brackets a comma b equals x. And we delete the code above that. And then we can go ahead and let's use our template strings. Let's print out the a variable and the b variable. And if everything is correct, we should see the string on the right, unless I did something wrong. Well, should I save? Well, that was supposed to work, but it's not. So, I guess if anyone can tell me what's wrong, otherwise, that is something I'm not familiar with. Well, I guess that's okay. There are ways to destructure, and I did use them in the React talk. It's not working right now, and that's my mistake. But at this moment, I'd like to open the floor to any questions from you guys. That's pretty much all I have for you. And anyone in the YouTube chat, if you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer that as well. Anyone in the room? No? Alright, let's see the chat. Let's see what we got here. How do you put an apostrophe inside a template string? Good question. You can use, you can just use an escape character. If you had a const t3 and you had the asterisk and you just said like, I don't know, like Ethan's item, then you could input that character into the string directly like that using a backspace character. Yes, Joe W. in the chat brings up a good point. ES6 needs transpiling. CodePen lets you run ES6 directly. Google Chrome lets you run ES6 directly. And I believe Firefox now lets you run ES6 directly. And I'm not sure about Internet Explorer, for example, does not. The old, not Microsoft Edge, but Internet Explorer, which some people still do use on old operating systems, does not let you run ES6 code. So what you need to do is you need to use something like Babel, which we use in the React talk, and we transpile it back down to, JavaScript native code. So we can actually go to the Babel compiler, and we can actually, put some code into it. They have their live thing here, their REPL. Oh, this was from the last one. So you see that the little bit of JavaScript here. Here's an example of working destructuring. Notice how we're pulling the club variable off the props object, and the props object is being passed to the greeting function. So, and then also, look, here's another arrow function. So you can see here in React code me using a lot of the features that I told you guys today. And I even have a default parameter inside my destructuring. So a lot of this stuff really is combined together. But what I wanted to show you is that we can go const t equals, and we can use actually here, let's do this. Const t equals 1, and then const t2 equals template string. I have 1 or t cookies. And then on the right, you should see that in native JavaScript, you're going to have, variable t equals 1, and then variable t2 equals I have plus t plus cookies. So this is, what I'm showing you guys. You're simplifying the way you need to write code. What's up?
What is the case if as far as constant let is like a block variable? So what is the case when you have two variables of the same name but in different blocks?
In different blocks?
How can you transpile it?
Yeah, so as long as, a constant is block scope. Everything is, top-down scoped. So if you declare a constant, up here on like the global, and then you created a code block, and this is actually syntactically valid. I didn't know that for a while, but this is actually syntactically valid. You create a code block on the page, and you were to reference the console.log t, that's valid, or ish. It'll do it. And if you wanted to redeclare that variable t inside here, technically you could, but you really shouldn't. The reason, I'm sorry, this is not allowed. If you had the let keyword, this would be allowed. But what you see on the screen right here is not valid. This will run an error because the constant t on the outside of our block scope is feeding itself into the local block scope. But if you do the reverse and you had like constant t declared in here, and I'm just going to delete this top, and we had our local block here, and then we had another constant t out here, then this doesn't work either. And you're like, but why not? It's because JavaScript, when it reads a whole file, all the constants get lifted to the top of the file and then fed back down. So then what this lets you do, if I remember correctly, is you're actually able to go ahead and write a console.log statement, and you can log a variable before it was defined, and that's technically valid. It's really bad coding, but technically it's allowed. Let's look at some more questions in here. All right. Cool. So yeah, I don't think we have anything left in the chat. Someone quickly asked, why do we use Babel? Babel is just a transpiler. It lets you take ES6 code and put it into native JavaScript. Use what you would need to use if you're going to deploy your application across multiple browsers. But if you're running something inside a Node.js console, or you're running something inside CodePen, or you're running something inside of like a Google Chrome console, you don't need to use Babel because ES6 is valid syntax. But with that, that is all I have for today, guys. Thank you so much on the Free Code Camp end for joining me. Hope you guys had a lot of fun. You guys can rewatch the video. You can also reach out to me at my Twitter. I'll post that in the chat at any time. I'd be happy to take your questions there. And you can also find me on GitHub at Ethan-Arrowood. And again, you guys can reach out to me on GitHub or Twitter. I'd be happy to teach you some things about open source, talk to you about React, or talk to you about JavaScript. So I hope everyone on the Free Code Camp end has a wonderful day. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. And thank all of you guys for being here in person. That was incredible. Thank you very much. Oh, sweet. Yeah.